When billionaire Michael Chen decided to test his employees in Mandarin, he never expected that the only perfect answer would come from a 7-year-old girl hiding behind a supply cabinet. But no one could imagine what would come next. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The 42nd floor of the Chen Industries Tower vibrated with nervous energy as employees gathered in the main conference room. Michael Chen, the 32-year-old billionaire CEO, stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his impeccably tailored suit and dark eyes scanning the faces before him. Born in Portland, Oregon, as the son of Chinese immigrants, Michael had built his technology empire from nothing, and today he had something special planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of America's youngest billionaires. "Today we're doing something different. I'm looking for hidden talents in our company, skills that might be overlooked in traditional evaluations." In the back corner of the conference room, Sarah Martinez quietly cleaned the water glasses, her movements so practiced and silent that most people forgot she was there. At 45 years old, Sarah had been the night cleaning supervisor at Chen Industries for 3 years, and she knew every corner of this building. What most people didn't know was that Sarah spoke 5 languages fluently, including Mandarin, a skill she had acquired during her younger years working as a translator before circumstances forced her to take cleaning jobs to support her daughter. Little Emily Martinez, 7 years old, was hidden behind a supply cart in the hallway, her large brown eyes wide with curiosity. School had ended early due to a teachers' meeting, and Sarah couldn't find anyone to watch the child. Emily often spent these afternoons doing homework quietly in empty offices, remaining invisible while her mother worked. She had become an expert at listening to the adult conversations that filled these corporate corridors. "The test is simple," Michael continued, switching seamlessly to Mandarin. "I want each of you to answer this question in Mandarin. What is the most important quality for innovation in the modern business world? And how would you implement it in a team environment?" The room fell into silence. The faces around the table showed confusion and panic. Most employees had no idea that their CEO spoke Mandarin fluently, much less expected them to respond in the language. Michael's expression remained neutral, but internally he was disappointed. He had hoped to find someone in his company who shared his cultural heritage and could help him expand into Asian markets. Minutes passed. Department heads nervously shuffled papers. The marketing director cleared her throat several times but said nothing. The operations chief stared at his hands. Michael's disappointment grew with each passing second. From behind the supply cart, Emily had heard every word. During the countless nights spent in these hallways, while her mother cleaned, she had listened to hundreds of Michael's phone conversations with business partners in Shanghai and Beijing. His voice was familiar to her, warm but commanding, exactly like now. Unconsciously, Emily had absorbed not just the language, but the nuances of the business terminology he used. Something stirred within Emily. She knew the answer. The words formed perfectly in her mind in Mandarin, complete with the appropriate business terminology she had heard Michael use so many times. Before she could stop herself, Emily emerged from behind the cart. "Innovation requires cultural bridges," Emily said clearly in perfect Mandarin, her small voice echoing through the silent conference room. "The most important quality is linguistic diversity because it allows teams to understand global perspectives. Implementation should begin with cross-cultural communication training and hiring practices that value multilingual skills, creating an environment where different viewpoints can merge into revolutionary ideas." The conference room exploded in stunned silence. 40 executives turned to stare at the 7-year-old girl standing in the doorway, her school backpack still on her back and long dark hair in neat braids. Sarah dropped the cloth she was holding, her face paling as she realized her daughter had just exposed them to unforeseeable consequences. Michael's mouth opened. In 3 years of leading this company, None of his well-paid executives had ever demonstrated the type of sophisticated understanding of business strategy that this child had just displayed, in impeccable Mandarin, no less. The accent was perfect, the grammar flawless, and the business insight was genuinely impressive. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" Michael asked, returning to English, his voice filled with admiration instead of anger. Emily looked nervously at her mother, then back at the intimidating figure at the head of the table. "I listen when you talk on the phone. Mama works late and I do homework in the empty offices. You always sound so smart when you talk to people in China." Sarah stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry. Emily shouldn't have been listening. We'll leave immediately and never—" "No," Michael said firmly, raising his hand to stop her. His mind was racing. This girl had just shown more business insight and cultural awareness than his entire executive team combined. "Don't apologize, Emily. How long have you been listening to my calls?" Emily thought carefully, counting on her fingers. "Since Mama started working here? Maybe 3 years? You talk a lot about innovation and respect, and how American companies need to understand Chinese culture better to make good partnerships." The room remained silent, executives exchanging perplexed glances. How had a 7-year-old child absorbed complex business concepts that some of them still struggled with? Michael studied Emily's face, seeing intelligence far beyond her years, but also something more, a hunger for knowledge that reminded him of himself at that age. Michael walked slowly toward Emily, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. When he reached her, he knelt down to eye level with her, something he had never done with any adult in this building. "Emily, would you like to answer another question for me?" Emily nodded eagerly, her initial nervousness replaced by excitement. She had never had an adult ask for her opinion before, especially someone as important as Mr. Chen. In Mandarin, Michael said, "Tell me what you think American companies do wrong when they try to work with Chinese companies." Without hesitation, Emily replied in fluent Mandarin, "They focus too much on quick profits and not enough on building relationships. In Chinese culture, trust takes time to develop. American executives often rush through the process and miss opportunities for long-term partnerships. They also don't understand the importance of face and hierarchy in negotiations." Several executives gasped audibly. Sarah's legs felt weak and she gripped a chair back for support. Her 7-year-old daughter was discussing international business strategy with the same confidence most adults used to talk about the weather. Michael stood slowly, his mind working frantically. This wasn't just impressive, this was extraordinary. Emily had identified one of the main challenges he had been struggling with for years. His attempts to expand into Asian markets had consistently failed because his executives didn't understand the cultural nuances that Emily had just perfectly articulated. "Emily," Michael said softly, "how would you like to come work with me tomorrow?" The next morning, Emily Martinez walked through the gleaming lobby of Chen Industries, holding her mother's hand, but everything looked different. News of yesterday's conference room incident had spread through the building like fire, and employees who had never noticed the cleaning lady's daughter before now stared openly as she passed. Sarah had barely slept, her mind spinning with worry and disbelief. She had dressed Emily in her best school dress, a simple blue thing from Target that looked painfully out of place among the designer suits and luxury accessories that filled the building's upper floors. "Remember, Mika," Sarah whispered as they entered the elevator, "be respectful and only speak when spoken to." Emily nodded solemnly, but inside she felt an excitement she had never experienced before. For 3 years she had observed this world from the shadows, invisible and silent. Today, someone important wanted to hear what she had to say. Michael's corner office occupied the entire 45th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Portland Bay. Emily had cleaned these windows with her mother countless times, but had never seen the view from this angle during the day. The Golden Gate Bridge stretched majestically across the water, and the morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and blue. "Good morning, Emily," Michael said, rising from behind his massive desk. He had deliberately dressed more casually today, car keys and an unbuttoned shirt instead of his usual suit, hoping to make the girl feel more comfortable. "Did you sleep well?" Emily nodded shyly, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the room's grandeur and the importance of the man addressing her. Yesterday's confidence seemed to have evaporated in the bright light of his imposing office. "I have a proposal for you," Michael continued, gesturing toward two comfortable chairs arranged by the window. "I'd like you to listen to a phone call I'm going to make with a potential business partner in Beijing. Afterward, I want your honest opinion about how the conversation went." Sarah began to protest. This was far beyond anything she could have imagined, but Michael's gentle yet firm expression stopped her. "Mrs. Martinez, your daughter has a gift. Yesterday proved it. Today I want to understand the extent of that gift." As if on cue, Michael's assistant knocked and entered with a small conference table set up, complete with child-sized headphones and a notepad. Emily's eyes widened at the professional treatment. No adult had ever taken her ideas seriously enough to provide real business equipment. The call began at 9 o'clock sharp. Michael spoke rapid Mandarin with Liu Wei, the CEO of a large manufacturing company in Beijing. Emily put on the headphones and listened intently, her young face furrowing in concentration as she followed the complex negotiations about supply chain management and production schedules. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. Emily took notes in her neat 7-year-old handwriting, occasionally drawing small figures to help her remember important points. Sarah watched in amazement as her daughter transformed into someone she barely recognized. Focused, analytical, completely absorbed in the business discussion. When the call ended, Michael turned to Emily with genuine curiosity. "So, what did you think?" Emily studied her notes for a moment, then looked up with serious eyes. "Mr. Liu didn't completely trust you," she said in English. "He kept asking the same questions in different ways, like he thought you might be lying about delivery timelines. And when you talked about expanding the partnership, his voice got colder." Michael's eyebrows raised. Emily had identified something he had felt but couldn't fully articulate. "What else?" "He's worried about cultural differences," Emily continued, warming to the subject. "When you mentioned the American team coming to Beijing for training, he used formal language that created distance. I think he's worried that American workers won't respect Chinese traditions." Michael leaned forward, fascinated. "How did you manage to pick up all of this from tone of voice?" Emily tilted her head, thinking, "It's like when kids at school don't want to play with someone new. They're polite, but they use different words, and their voice sounds different. Mr. Liu was being polite, but he doesn't really want to work with Americans. He thinks you'll be difficult." The accuracy of Emily's assessment shocked Michael. He had been trying to close this deal for 6 months, and Liu had been reluctant and suspicious throughout all negotiations. Emily had identified the core problem in a single conversation. "What would you suggest I do?" Michael asked, surprising himself with the question. He was asking for business advice from a 7-year-old child, and somehow it felt completely natural. Emily pursed her lips, a gesture that reminded Michael of his own grandmother when she was thinking deeply. "You need to show him that you understand Chinese culture. Maybe send something that proves you respect his traditions and don't bring the American team training right away. Let him get comfortable with you first." Michael took out his phone and began typing notes. Emily's suggestions aligned perfectly with everything he had learned about Chinese business culture, but presented with a clarity his expensive consultants had never achieved. "Emily," Michael said slowly, "how would you feel about coming to work with me every day after school for the next few weeks? I'll pay a consulting fee, and we can set up a proper workspace for you." Emily's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? Can I help with real business?" Sarah finally found her voice. "Mr. Chen, this is incredibly generous, but Emily is just a child. She needs to focus on her studies and normal 7-year-old activities." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, Emily's education comes first. But Mrs. Martinez, your daughter has demonstrated skills that could revolutionize how American companies approach international partnerships. I'd like to nurture this gift while ensuring she still has a normal childhood. Over the next 2 hours, Michael outlined his proposal. Emily would spend 2 hours after school, 3 days a week, listening to international business calls and providing cultural insights. She would have her own small office adjacent to his, complete with child-appropriate furniture and educational materials. Sarah would be promoted to executive assistant for international affairs, with a salary increase that would allow them to move from their cramped apartment. As the morning progressed, Emily's initial shyness completely disappeared. She asked thoughtful questions about Michael's business philosophy, offered insights about cultural misunderstandings she had observed in his previous calls, and even suggested alternative approaches to difficult negotiations. By lunchtime, Michael realized he was looking at the most valuable addition to his company in years. Emily wasn't just bilingual, she was culturally bilingual, capable of navigating the subtle communication differences that destroyed most international business relationships. But as the day drew to a close and Emily gathered her things to return to school, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. How had the daughter of a cleaning lady developed such sophisticated understanding of business and culture? Sarah Martinez was clearly more than she appeared to be, and Michael felt that discovering the truth about Emily's background could reveal secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about the people working in his building. "Same time tomorrow?" Michael asked as Emily headed toward the elevator. Emily smiled, her face glowing with happiness and purpose. "Yes, Mr. Chen. Tomorrow I want to tell you about the call you had with the lady from Tokyo last week. I think she likes you, but you missed all her hints about wanting a partnership." As the elevator doors closed, Michael looked thoughtfully at his reflection in the polished metal. In 24 hours, a 7-year-old girl had given him more valuable business insights than his entire executive team had provided in months. Tomorrow, he would begin asking serious questions about Emily Martinez and her mysteriously insightful mother. 3 weeks had passed since Emily's first day as Michael's unofficial cultural consultant, and the transformation was remarkable. The small office adjacent to Michael's had been converted into a child-friendly workspace, complete with a desk sized for Emily, shelves full of books about international cultures, and a world map covered with colored pins marking Michael's global business contacts. Emily had quickly established herself as an invaluable resource for the company. Her insights had already helped Michael successfully renegotiate 2 major contracts, one with the manufacturing company from Beijing and another with a technology firm in Seoul. But it was her analysis of the Tokyo partnership opportunity that truly demonstrated her extraordinary skills. "Mr. Chen," Emily had said after listening to a particularly frustrating call with Yamamoto Industries, "Mrs. Yamamoto keeps mentioning cherry blossom season and asking if you've ever visited Japan in spring. She's not making small talk. She's inviting you to visit during the most beautiful time of year. In Japanese culture, sharing seasonal beauty with someone is a sign of friendship and respect." Michael had immediately scheduled a trip to Tokyo the following month, and within hours of confirming his visit, Mrs. Yamamoto had sent a preliminary partnership agreement worth $15 million. But success brought scrutiny. Other executives in the building had begun asking pointed questions about the girl who seemed to have unlimited access to the CEO's office. During a senior team meeting on Friday afternoon, tensions finally exploded. "With all due respect, Michael," said Patricia Hartman, the sharp HR chief, "having a child involved in sensitive business negotiations creates serious liability issues. What if she accidentally shares confidential information? What if competitors find out about our unconventional consulting arrangement?" Michael looked up from the quarterly reports he was reviewing, his expression neutral but his eyes cold. "Emily has shown more business insight in 3 weeks than some department heads have shown in 3 years, Patricia. Her insights have already generated over $20 million in new revenue." That's not the point," Patricia continued, her voice becoming more aggressive. She's 7 years old. She doesn't understand the legal implications of what she's hearing. And frankly, the whole arrangement seems unprofessional. What are we going to tell our shareholders when they discover we're getting business advice from a child? The room fell silent. Other executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, clearly divided between admiration for Emily's contributions and concern about the situation's unconventional nature. Michael stood slowly, his full height and imposing presence filling the space. Emily has identified cultural nuances that our expensive consultants completely missed. She's prevented us from making costly mistakes in 3 different negotiations. If you have concerns about professionalism, perhaps you should examine why a 7-year-old child understands international business better than our senior leadership. Before Patricia could respond, Michael's assistant knocked and entered with a worried expression. Mr. Chen, there's a situation. Emily's mother needs to speak with you immediately. She seems very upset. Michael excused himself from the meeting and found Sarah Martinez waiting in his office, her face pale and her hands shaking. Emily sat quietly in her small chair, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. Mr. Chen, Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something about Emily, about why she learned so quickly. But first, I need you to promise that this information won't put my daughter in danger. Michael felt a chill of apprehension. Over the past 3 weeks, he had begun to suspect that Sarah's background was much more complex than the story of a simple cleaning lady. Her occasional use of sophisticated vocabulary, her perfect understanding of business terminology, and her obvious intelligence suggested a history she hadn't shared. Sarah, whatever you need to tell me, Emily's safety is my primary concern, Michael said, settling into his chair. Nothing is more important than protecting her. Sarah took a deep breath, then looked directly into Michael's eyes. My real name is Dr. Sarah Elena Martinez Santos. I have a doctorate in international relations from Stanford University and a master's in linguistics from UC Berkeley. For 8 years, I worked as a senior cultural consultant for Fortune 500 companies, expanding into Latin American and Asian markets. The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. The woman he had assumed was an uneducated immigrant had credentials that surpassed most of his executive team. Why are you working as a cleaning supervisor? He asked quietly. 3 years ago, I discovered that my consulting firm was using my cultural expertise to help American companies exploit workers in developing countries, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. When I tried to expose the corruption, they destroyed my reputation and threatened Emily's safety. I had to disappear, start over with a new identity. Cleaning work was the only job I could find that didn't require background checks or references. Emily reached out and took her mother's hand, a gesture that revealed how much the 7-year-old child understood about their difficult circumstances. Mama had to protect us, Emily said simply. Bad people wanted to hurt her for telling the truth. Michael felt puzzle pieces falling into place. Emily's sophisticated understanding of business culture suddenly made perfect sense. She had been raised by a world-class expert in international relations. Her ability to identify subtle communication patterns wasn't just natural talent. It was the result of growing up in an environment where cultural nuances were discussed as naturally as the weather. Sarah, Michael said slowly, the people who threatened you, are they still a danger? Sarah nodded gravely. My old firm, Global Cultural Dynamics, has connections to some very powerful corporations. If they discover where I am, if they learn that Emily has inherited my skills. She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Michael's mind raced through the implications. For 3 weeks, he had been showcasing Emily's talents throughout his entire business network. If the wrong people learned about her abilities, if they connected her to Sarah's previous work, mother and daughter could be in serious danger. But as Michael looked at Emily, bright, eager and confident, He realized he couldn't simply send them away. Emily's gift was extraordinary. But more importantly, she and her mother had become important to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. "Here's what we're going to do," Michael said with the decisive tone that had built his empire. "Officially, Sarah, you're being promoted to senior cultural consultant. We'll create a legitimate consulting position that explains Emily's presence and abilities. Unofficially, I'll ensure that you two have the protection and resources you need to stay safe." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Chen, you don't understand the risks you'd be taking. These people have enormous influence. They could destroy your business just for helping us." Michael stood and walked to his window, looking out over the city where he had built his fortune from nothing. "Sarah, 3 weeks ago I thought I understood business culture. Emily taught me I barely knew anything. You two gave me something invaluable, the chance to build genuine international partnerships based on respect and understanding instead of exploitation." He turned back to face them, his expression resolute. "Besides, I didn't become a billionaire by backing down from powerful enemies. If global cultural dynamics wants a fight, they'll discover that Michael Chen doesn't lose battles that matter to him." As Friday afternoon sunlight streamed through the office windows, Michael began making plans that would protect Emily and Sarah while allowing their extraordinary talents to flourish. But he also began preparing for the possibility that his peaceful new life was about to become much more complicated. Outside the office, Patricia Hartman stood by the assistant's desk, having heard enough of the conversation to realize that the situation with Emily Martinez was far more significant than anyone had imagined. Returning to her office, Patricia began composing an email to a contact she hadn't spoken with in years, someone who worked for a consulting firm called Global Cultural Dynamics. Monday morning came with an ominous email waiting in Michael's inbox. The sender was identified as Global Cultural Dynamics, and the subject read, "Regarding stolen intellectual property and unauthorized use of proprietary methodologies." Michael's blood froze as he read the legal threats and demands for immediate termination of all consulting arrangements with former employee Dr. Sarah Elena Martinez Santos and her minor daughter. The email was precisely crafted to sound official and intimidating, but Michael recognized it for what it was, a warning shot. Someone had discovered Sarah's location and was preparing to strike. When he finished reading, his assistant came on the intercom with urgent news. "Mr. Chen, there are 3 people from Global Cultural Dynamics in the lobby demanding to speak with you immediately. They claim to have legal authority to remove Emily Martinez from the building." Michael's jaw tightened. The confrontation he had been preparing for had come sooner than expected. "Send them to conference room B and tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes. And please ask Sarah and Emily to come to my office immediately." When Sarah and Emily arrived, Michael could see that Sarah had already sensed trouble coming. Her face was pale, and she held Emily's hand protectively. Emily, dressed in her favorite purple dress, with her hair in careful braids, looked confused by the tension radiating from both adults. "They found us, didn't they?" Sarah asked quietly. Michael nodded gravely. 3 representatives are downstairs. They're claiming legal authority to remove Emily, which means they've fabricated some kind of custody or child welfare claim. It's a common intimidation tactic. They've threatened to separate you from Emily unless you comply with their demands. Emily looked at her mother with wide eyes. "Are the bad people here, Mama?" Sarah knelt down to Emily's level, her voice gentle but serious. "Yes, Mija, but Mr. Chen is going to help us. Remember what we practiced? If anyone asks you questions, you say you want to talk to Mama and Mr. Chen first." Michael walked to his wall safe and removed a thick folder he had prepared since Friday. "Sarah, I spent the weekend investigating global cultural dynamics. What I found will change everything." He opened the folder and spread documents across the table. "Your old firm isn't just exploiting workers. They're running an international operation that manipulates cultural consultants to facilitate corporate espionage. Sarah's eyes widened as she reviewed the documents. Bank records, email correspondence, and government contracts painted a picture of a company that used cultural expertise to help American corporations steal trade secrets and intellectual property from international partners. "This is worse than I thought," Sarah whispered. "I knew they were exploiting workers, but this..." She pointed to a document showing payments from defense contractors. "They're selling cultural intelligence to help companies manipulate foreign governments." Emily, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke, like when kids pretend to be friends with someone just to find out their secrets. Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. Once again, Emily had distilled a complex situation to its essential truth. "Exactly like that, Emily. And your mama discovered their secret, so they want to stop her from telling anyone." The intercom came on again. "Mr. Chen, the visitors are becoming increasingly aggressive. They're threatening to call Child Protective Services if you don't bring Emily down immediately." Michael's expression hardened. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." He turned to Sarah and Emily with determination. "Here's what we're going to do. Sarah, you and Emily go to my private elevator straight to the 46th floor. My personal attorney, Janet Morrison, is waiting there with emergency custody and immigration papers. If these people want a legal fight, they'll get one." As Sarah and Emily headed to the private elevator, Michael gathered the global cultural dynamics documents and prepared for battle. He had built his fortune by outmaneuvering competitors who underestimated him, and he wasn't about to let anyone threaten the family that had become so important to him. The 3 representatives waiting in conference room B were exactly what Michael had expected. Expensive suits, arrogant attitudes, and the type of corporate aggression that relied on intimidation rather than legitimate authority. The leader, a thin man with cold eyes named Richard Sterling, immediately launched into threats and demands. "Mr. Chen, Dr. Rodriguez Santos violated her confidentiality agreements and stole proprietary methodologies when she left our firm. The child has been exposed to confidential information and represents a significant security risk. We're here to escort them to our corporate office for debriefing." Michael sat across from them with calm confidence. "Mr. Sterling, I've reviewed Dr. Rodriguez Santos's original employment contract with your firm. The confidentiality agreement was invalidated when your company engaged in illegal activities that she was legally obligated to report. Furthermore, threatening to separate a mother from her daughter constitutes criminal intimidation." Sterling's confident expression wavered slightly. "Mr. Chen, I don't think you understand the scope of our legal authority here. We have connections throughout the corporate world and government agencies. Protecting Dr. Rodriguez Santos could seriously harm your business interests." Michael smiled coldly and opened his folder. "Mr. Sterling, I don't think you understand who you're threatening." He spread the documents across the table. "These show your company's involvement in corporate espionage, government contractor fraud, and theft of international trade secrets. I've already forwarded copies to the FBI, SEC, and several congressional oversight committees." The 3 representatives stared at the documents in shock. Sterling's face paled as he recognized internal global cultural dynamics communications that should have been impossible for an outsider to obtain. "Where did you get this?" Sterling demanded. Michael's smile widened. "Mr. Sterling, you made a critical mistake when you threatened Emily Martinez. That girl has friends throughout the international business community now. It turns out that several of your previous victims were very eager to share information when they learned about your tactics. Over the weekend, Michael had contacted all the business leaders Emily had helped him negotiate with over the past 3 weeks. When he explained the situation, they were outraged to learn that global cultural dynamics had previously manipulated them through cultural consultants working under threat and coercion. Evidence against Sterling's company had come from around the world. "You have exactly 10 minutes to leave this building," Michael continued, his voice carrying all the weight of his authority. If you or anyone from your company ever contacts Sarah or Emily Martinez again, I will personally ensure that every piece of evidence about your illegal activities reaches the appropriate authorities." Sterling stood up trembling, his intimidation tactics completely deflated. "This isn't over, Chen. You have no idea what kind of enemies you're making." Michael rose to his full height, his presence filling the room. "Mr. Sterling, you have no idea what kind of enemy you just made. I built $1 billion company from nothing, and I protect what's important to me. Emily and Sarah Martinez are under my protection now, and I suggest you remember that." As the three representatives hastily left the building, Michael returned to the 46th floor, where he found Sarah and Emily sitting with Janet Morrison, his attorney. Emily was coloring in a legal pad while the adults discussed paperwork, seemingly unaffected by the dramatic events swirling around her. "How did it go?" Sarah asked anxiously. "They're gone," Michael said with satisfaction, "and they won't be back." "Janet, did you manage to prepare the documents we discussed?" Janet nodded, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "All ready. Emergency custody protection, immigration status updates, and employment contracts that provide legal justification for Emily's consulting work. Sarah, you and Emily are now legally protected under several federal statutes." Emily looked up from her coloring. "Does that mean the bad people can't take me from Mama?" Michael knelt beside her chair, his expression gentle but serious. "Emily, no one will ever separate you from your mother. I promise that." As the afternoon sunlight filled the conference room, Michael realized that the confrontation with global cultural dynamics had revealed something important about his own feelings. Somewhere over the past 3 weeks, Sarah and Emily had stopped being employees and become something much more significant. They had become family. But Michael also knew that defeating the immediate threat from Sterling was only the beginning. Global cultural dynamics had powerful connections and extensive resources. The real battle for Emily and Sarah's safety had only just begun, and Michael was prepared to use every resource at his disposal to protect them. That night, as Emily helped her mother pack their belongings from their small apartment to move to the secure corporate housing Michael had arranged, neither of them noticed Patricia Hartman sitting in her car across the street, making calls to people who made global cultural dynamics look like amateurs. 2 months had passed since the confrontation with global cultural dynamics, and life had settled into a routine that seemed too good to be true. Emily had her own security team, discreet but professional bodyguards who posed as Michael's regular employees. Sarah had adapted to her new role as senior cultural consultant with remarkable success, helping Michael close deals that had been stalled for years. But on this particular Thursday evening, while Michael worked late in his office reviewing contracts, Emily made a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about their situation. Emily had been exploring the 46th floor, which housed the executive archives and the company's oldest records. Her natural curiosity had led her to a file section dating back to Michael's earliest business ventures. As she browsed through documents she couldn't fully understand, one photograph made her stop. The black and white image showed a much younger Michael beside a couple at what looked like a business conference. The man was Asian, well-dressed, and bore a striking resemblance to Michael. The woman was Latina, elegant, and had exactly Emily's eyes and facial structure. Emily stared at the photograph for a long moment, her 7-year-old mind trying to process what she was seeing. The woman in the picture looked like an older version of herself, and the man looked like Michael's brother or cousin. But it was the inscription on the back of the photograph that made Emily's heart race. Michael Chen, David Chen, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez. Partnership agreement signing, Mexico City, 1995. Dr. Elena Rodriguez. Emily's middle name was Elena, the same name her mother had used when she revealed her true identity. But Sarah had said her full name was Sarah Elena Martinez Santos. Elena Rodriguez was a different person, or was there something about her mother's past that even Emily didn't know? Emily carefully took the photograph and returned to Michael's office, where she found him on a video call with business partners in Singapore. She waited quietly until the call ended, then approached his desk with the photograph in her hand. "Mr. Chen," Emily said softly, "I found something in the old files. I think you might know my family." Michael looked at the photograph and froze. The image brought back memories he had buried for decades. His older brother David, the business partner who had been killed in a car accident in Mexico City 25 years ago, and David's brilliant wife Eleanor, who had disappeared after the tragedy. "Emily," Michael said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "where exactly did you find this?" Emily pointed toward the archives. "In a box marked International Partnerships 1995. And there were lots of papers about business in Mexico and South America." She paused, studying Michael's shocked expression. "The lady in the picture looks like me, and the man looks like you." Michael's hands trembled as he held the photograph. David Chen had been more than his business partner. He had been his only family, his mentor, and his best friend. When David died in that suspicious car accident in Mexico City, Michael had been devastated. Elena Rodriguez had been David's wife and business partner, a brilliant cultural consultant who had helped them establish their first international operations. "Emily," Michael said carefully, "I need you to call your mother right now. Don't tell her about the photograph yet. Just ask her to come to my office for an important conversation." When Sarah arrived 5 minutes later, Michael stood at the window with his back to the door. Emily sat in her usual chair with the photograph face down on the table in front of her. "Sarah," Michael said without turning around, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to tell me the complete truth. What was your maiden name before you married Emily's father?" Sarah's face paled. "Michael, why are you asking me this?" Michael turned around and looked directly at her. "Because I think Elena Rodriguez was my sister-in-law and Emily might be my niece." BD, the silence in the room was deafening. Sarah sank heavily into the chair beside Emily, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Emily looked from one adult to the other, sensing that something enormous was happening but not understanding what. "Show the photograph, Emily," Michael said gently. Emily turned the photograph over and slid it across the table to her mother. Sarah's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Tears filled her eyes, and her hand flew to her mouth in shock. "My God," Sarah whispered. "Michael, you're David's little brother. You were just starting college when—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Michael sat down across from them, his own eyes filling with tears. "Elena, I searched for you after David died. I spent years trying to find you and the baby that Elena was carrying. The authorities said you two had disappeared, possibly killed in the same accident that took David." Emily's eyes widened as the puzzle pieces came together in her mind. "Mama, were you married before? Is Mr. Chen my uncle?" Sarah reached out and took Emily's hand. "Mija, your father was David Chen, Michael's older brother. You are Michael's niece. When your father was murdered, I was 8 months pregnant. The people who killed him were looking for me too, so I had to disappear to protect you." Michael felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. For 7 years, he had been unknowingly surrounded by the family he had lost and mourned. Emily wasn't just a brilliant girl who happened to work in his building. She was David's daughter, his own flesh and blood. "Emily," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion, "your father was the most important person in my life. He taught me everything about business, about integrity, about being a good man. When he died, I thought I had lost my only family forever." Emily stood up and walked around the table to where Michael sat. Without hesitation, she climbed into his lap and hugged him tightly. "Uncle Michael," she said simply, as if the relationship had always been obvious to her. "Papa would be proud of how you took care of us." The three of them sat together in the approaching twilight, finally understanding the forces that had brought them together. Michael realized that Emily's extraordinary intelligence wasn't just inherited from Sarah. She had David's analytical mind and natural business instincts. Her ability to understand complex cultural dynamics came from both sides of her remarkable heritage. But as the initial shock of their reunion began to fade, Michael's mind turned to darker implications. If Emily was David's daughter, then the people who had killed his brother might still be interested in eliminating David's family line. Global cultural dynamics could have been just the beginning of their problems. "Elena," Michael said, using Sarah's real name for the first time. "The people who killed David, do you know who they were?" Sarah nodded gravely. "A consortium of American defense contractors who were afraid that David's ethical business practices would expose their corruption in international deals. They've been hunting us for 7 years, Michael. Global cultural dynamics was just their latest attempt to find us." Michael's expression hardened with determination and anger. The people who had killed his brother had spent 7 years terrorizing his sister-in-law and threatening his niece. But now Emily and Elena had something they'd never had before: the full protection and resources of someone who loved them and had the power to fight back. "They made a critical mistake," Michael said with cold fury. "They let me find my family. Now they're going to discover what happens when you threaten a Chen." Outside the building, Patricia Hartman made her final phone call to the consortium that had hunted Elena Rodriguez for 7 years. But she had no idea she had just signed her own termination papers by revealing the location of Portland's most protected family. The final confrontation came on a Friday morning when Emily should have been at school, but a teacher development day had left her spending the morning at Michael's office. She was contentedly doing homework while Michael and Eleanor prepared for a critical board meeting that would determine the future of Chen Industries' international expansion. Patricia Hartman had been feeding information to David Chen's killers for months, believing she was simply reporting on a security threat to the company. When she learned that Emily was actually David's daughter, she made the phone call that brought the most dangerous people from Elena's past directly to Michael's door. The attack came swiftly and without warning. 6 men in business suits entered the building through a service entrance that Patricia had provided access to. They moved with military precision toward the executive floors. Their objective was simple: eliminate Elena Rodriguez and her daughter once and for all. But Michael hadn't survived in the brutal world of international business by being unprepared. The security system that Elena had insisted on installing after the global cultural dynamics incident was state-of-the-art. And the moment the intruders breached the service entrance, alarms began wailing throughout the building. "Emily, come here now," Michael said with urgent calm as security alerts flashed on his computer screen. Emily immediately abandoned her homework and ran to him, her 7-year-old instincts recognizing the seriousness in his voice. Michael activated the building's emergency lockdown protocol, sealing the executive floors and trapping the intruders between the 40th and 42nd floors. Elena burst into the office from her adjacent workspace, her face pale but determined. "How many?" she asked, checking the security monitors. "6 professionals," Michael replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he coordinated with building security and the private protection team he had hired after discovering Emily's true identity. "They're armed and moving with military precision. This isn't global cultural dynamics. These are the people who killed David." Emily looked at her mother and uncle with frightened but brave eyes. "Are they here to hurt us?" Elena knelt down and took Emily's hands. "Mija, these are very bad people who hurt your papa before you were born. But Uncle Michael has prepared for this day, and we're going to be safe." What the attackers didn't know was that Michael had spent the last 2 months transforming his building into a fortress. Every executive floor had been retrofitted with military-grade security measures, safe rooms with independent communication systems, and escape routes that not even his own employees knew about. The confrontation lasted 47 minutes. The attackers, expecting to find a vulnerable woman and child, instead encountered a coordinated defense that included private security, local law enforcement, and FBI agents who had been investigating the consortium that ordered David Chen's murder for over 2 decades. Patricia Hartman's betrayal had inadvertently provided federal authorities with the evidence they needed to finally arrest the people responsible for multiple murders, corporate espionage, and international terrorism. When the attackers realized they had walked into a trap, they tried to retreat, but found every exit sealed and federal agents waiting for them. As the last of the attackers was led away in handcuffs, Emily sat in her uncle's lap, observing the dramatic events unfold through the office windows. Instead of being traumatized by the violence, she seemed fascinated by the strategic complexity of the operation Michael had orchestrated. "Uncle Michael," Emily said thoughtfully, "you planned all of this, didn't you? You knew they would eventually come." Michael held his niece closer, marveling once again at her ability to understand complex situations. "Yes, Emily. From the moment I learned who you really were, I knew we had to be ready to protect our family." Elena was nearby, tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in 7 years, they were tears of relief instead of fear. "Is it really over?" she asked. FBI agent Sarah Martinez, who had led the investigation into the consortium, entered the office with a satisfied expression. "Dr. Rodriguez, the people who killed your husband are finally in federal custody. The evidence we gathered today will keep them in prison for life. You and Emily are safe now." As the afternoon sunlight filled the office where their family had been reunited, Michael realized that the last 3 months had transformed all of their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Emily wasn't just his brilliant cultural consultant. She was the daughter his brother never lived to see grow up. Elena wasn't just his most valuable employee. She was the sister-in-law he had mourned for 7 years. "So, what happens now?" Emily asked, looking at the two most important people in her life. Michael and Elena exchanged glances. And in that moment, both understood that their unconventional business arrangement had evolved into something much more significant. They were a family united by love, loss, and the extraordinary girl who had brought them together. "Now we build the future your father would have wanted," Michael said, his voice full of determination and hope. "Chen Industries will become the most ethical and successful international business in the world, and you're going to help us do it." Emily smiled, her face lighting up with the excitement and confidence that had captured Michael's attention that first day in the conference room. "Can I have my own business cards?" As laughter filled the office, Patricia Hartman was being led away in handcuffs, her career and freedom lost due to her betrayal. But in the Chen Industries executive suite, a family that had been torn apart by tragedy was finally complete again. Emily Rodriguez Chen would grow up to revolutionize international business, building bridges between cultures and creating partnerships based on mutual respect and understanding. But she would always remember that her greatest achievement was reuniting her uncle and mother, healing wounds that had festered for 7 years, and proving that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries come from the most unexpected places. 6 months later, Emily would address the Junior United Nations Assembly, speaking in perfect Mandarin about the importance of cultural understanding in global peace efforts. But that's another story for another day. Today, a 7-year-old girl who had started as an invisible observer in a corporate conference room had become the heart of a business empire built on family, integrity, and the belief that the smallest voices often carry the most powerful truths. Did you enjoy this touching story? If it moved you as much as it moved me, click like, subscribe to the channel for more stories that will touch your heart, turn on the bell to not miss any. Tell me in the comments, do you believe that love transcends death? Have you ever had an inexplicable experience with loved ones who have already passed away? I want to hear your stories. And don't forget to share this video with that special person who needs to believe in miracles and second chances. Until the next story, a hug from the heart.